Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our webinar, Revolutionising Conversations and Generative AI and Intent-Based Chatbots. Thank you so much for joining on this very drizzly afternoon or morning, wherever you guys are. There are still a few people, I think, trickling in, so we'll just kind of move on along. The session will be recorded anyway, so yeah, let's go in. So, just by way of introductions, so hello, my name is Patsy Niaku. I am the Head of Commercial Operations here at Talkative. I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Felix Winstone, who is the CEO and co-founder here at Talkative, and the lovely Steve Williams, who is our Head of Sales as well. So we've got a lot to get through today. So just a quick overview of the agenda so you can understand what's coming up. So first of all, we're going to kind of have a broader view of the landscape of AI today itself, before kind of diving into the differences between the different kinds of chatbots and how that has evolved since inception. Then we'll be looking at the actual usability and the use cases and the best practices associated with adopting a generative AI chatbot in the real world, before we go into a truly magical demonstration of Talkative generative AI chatbots and our chatbot builder and all the kind of a demonstration of the back end of it, before going into a Q&A session at the very end. So you should see at the very bottom of your screens a Q&A section. So if at any point during the webinar you do have any questions, feel free to drop those in and we will get around to as many as we possibly can throughout the webinar and at the end. So let's get into it. So we are living in the society of AI. AI, as you guys are all aware, is the biggest, the most dominant conversation of today. It's changing and affecting every part of modern life and culture, and hundreds of millions of people, including your customers, are using it on a daily basis for their work, their play, entertainment, social media, whatever it might be. So what are the implications of this change? Well, what that means is everyday people are becoming more used to using it, more used to seeing it, engaging with it, and interacting with it. So I've included here just some screenshots of some headlines that kind of summarize kind of this wave of conversation really nicely, I feel. And I've also included this statistic, which I think was really interesting. So in terms of opportunities that this presents, so this stat was derived from a survey conducted by the Office of National Statistics here in the UK in late 2023. And it showed that the second most highly reported way that adults between the age of 16 and 49 reported that they felt AI could improve their lives was through improving their shopping experiences. So just an interesting one to bear in mind as we move through. So how capable is this technology? Just how clever is it? Now, bit of a kooky way to demonstrate it, but I think it demonstrates it quite nicely. What we're looking at here is a figure that is taken from a piece of research conducted by a professor at the Chicago-Kent College of Law. And it essentially shows that the latest model of ChatGPT-4, was able to take and pass both the multiple choice and essay portions of the legal bar examination. And to be perfectly frank, it absolutely wiped the floor with the student average. Now, as we know, law students are kind of at the pinnacle of academic prowess and success. And to do this really does demonstrate just how far this technology has come on. And with each iteration, it's only getting better. So for any Suits fans out there, I think if Harvey Specter was hiring an associate now, probably wouldn't be Mike, it'd be ChatGPT-4. So not going to dwell too much on this slide, but I think it's important to address the investment that's going into the space. So the stats that you're looking at here on the screen are from Ernst & Young, and they show that actually 43% of businesses surveyed are making generative AI their top investment for 2024. The estimated global market size of AI is estimated to be a huge $407 billion by 2027. And for context, that is a compound yearly growth rate of, I think it's 36.2% year on year, and showing absolutely no signs of slowing down. So what's the point? Well, the point is, I think, as with anything that is kind of dominating the space and anything shiny and new, the biggest problem that we see is with inertia. That's the biggest hurdle to overcome. And really the message here is get ahead, adopt it, learn about it, understand the best practices. What we don't want to be seeing is in the future, companies then having to play catch up. So another graph, we absolutely love a graph here. This one is really looking at kind of the perception and the views of the role of AI in the contact center environment and in that space. It's taken from from this report, this Contact Babel report, is not actually released yet. It's coming out this week, I believe. And it's a report that Talkative have, we're headline sponsors of the report. We'll be sending you all the attendees of today's webinar, a link to that report as soon as it lands. I would highly recommend reading it. It's full of really valuable information. And really what this is displaying is AI going to be kind of coming after the jobs? What does it mean for your teams? What's the perception there? Well, actually, of the 200 UK-based companies that were surveyed as part of this report, overwhelmingly, the answer is no. The best place for AI in the contact center is still in support of the human agents. It's not going to be able to replicate that empathetic nature that human agents can provide. So let's actually get into the chatbot, shall we? So let's have a look at how they differ. So since 2020, usage of chatbots has doubled. Now, despite it only being 4 years ago, they have changed a lot since their first inception. So the primitive chatbots, the rudimentary bots we saw, very kind of strict parameters. It guided customers down a very straight and narrow path, very rigid. The next sort of generation that we see now is the intent-based chatbots, which do offer a much more flexible degree of kind of conversational flow. And it uses NLP in order to understand the customer questions and actually match that to an appropriate response that is stored, their pre-written responses. Now, when we look at kind of the challenging perception in the wider sphere of chatbots, and we kind of get this kind of annoying or inflexible user experience, really what that is down to is a poorly set up, poorly maintained intent-based chatbot. This stat, which is also derived from the Contact Babel report that I referenced earlier, is interesting because it shows that actually on the surface of it, that perception of, oh, do people actually like chatbots? I don't know if my customers really enjoy using them, is only really down to the fact that if they are poorly set up, a human is going to resolve their query much faster. Actually, what the research has showed is that if a chatbot is able to resolve the customer's question faster and more effectively, then this stat actually flips on its head and people prefer going down a chatbot route. So how do intent-based chatbots work? Well, as the name suggests, they are based, they're deriving the answers based on the intent. So they use natural language processing to really understand what a customer is trying to achieve within their question. It will then match that to the most appropriate response out of a host of kind of pre-written responses. And that will be that is delivered to the customer in the end. Now, as such, they're able to kind of maintain a bit of context within a conversation, and the flow can be quite good. The main downfall that we see with intent-based chatbots actually is in the high time cost implications involved with setting it up and then maintaining it ongoing. So because everything has to be pre-written, all of the questions need to be written out and matched to the responses, a huge amount of time is dedicated then to kind of refreshing that and making sure that everything is up to date. As well as this, the actual platforms that are sometimes used to actually build out the intent flows can be quite challenging, and there's a high kind of technical skill set required, which is not always translatable across multiple platforms as well. So I've just included a screenshot here of Dialogflow. For those of you who haven't used it before, it's basically a platform that assists with kind of building out these intent-based chatbots. And as you can see, it can be a little bit tricky to kind of understand the flow of a conversation when you compare it to particularly like ours at Talkative, where it's a much easier way to kind of understand the flow of a conversation. Having said that, intent-based chatbots definitely do have their place and can and should be used alongside generative AI to great effect. So generative AI, what is it? Well, it derives its answers. So it uses large language models, which are complex models that are built to design they're designed to understand and generate new content from human language. So the best way to think about it is it's like a neural network, like a brain that lives within your computer. So the key thing here is text-based knowledge bases. This is what it's trained on, and this is what it then generates the answers from. So your knowledge bases can be anything from URLs, PDFs, documentations, even video transcripts. And the LLM will then scan the words and predict the next word, and that's how it generates the answer. So this really kind of blows the doors wide open in terms of flexibility of use. So you can really apply it to lots of different scenarios, lots of different customer query types. However, the predictive nature does mean that it's not always perfect in its, it's not always perfect. And Felix is going to go into a little bit more detail there about how you can properly ring fence your generative AI chatbot there, but it is getting more accurate with every release. So again, just a few kind of key points to raise here about actually putting putting out a generative AI chatbot and getting it working. What we don't want to do is kind of unleash like a version of ChatGPT that is wide open and can answer anything and everything to your customers. This is where you're seeing some of the crazy stories that are out there in the media now. So you can apply quite strict parameters to the LLM, so it'll only give answers found within the knowledge bases that you've uploaded to it. And if there is no answer, it's not going to kind of create one for you. And in terms of maintenance, much easier to maintain than the intent-based chatbots, because really what it comes down to is ensuring that your knowledge bases are well maintained. If they are well maintained and they are up to date and accurate, the generative AI will be able to deliver a beautifully articulate and highly accurate response every time, which massively reduces then the maintenance and ongoing costs associated with that. So just to summarize then the key differences, so intent-based chatbots, the responses are pre-written. This means a lot of time and effort actually going into writing those, whereas the generative AI, it's generated fresh every time from the knowledge base. That new generation means that context can be applied to the flow, which makes it much more conversational in its feel, whereas intent-based chatbots can have that inflexible bot-like feel if they kind of don't understand a query properly. And like I said, maintenance per intent. It's very time consuming. It can require a level of technical expertise, whereas with generative AI, it's really knowledge bases only. So that's the kind of summary of the key differences there. So now we're going to move over to generative AI in the real world and some kind of benefits, use cases, and lessons learned. I'm going to hand over now to Felix, who will guide us through this portion today.
Thanks very much, Patsy, and you'll be pleased to hear after me it's the demo. So thanks for bearing with us while we go through this. So this is another graph from the Contact Babel report, and I think it shows two key things. So the first is, even though chatbot deployments have been increasing and the rate at which customers are able to be answered purely by a chatbot is increasing as well. I think what we see, at least in our own client base, that with a traditional intent-based bot, if you can get over 20% containment or deflection without the need for a human handoff, then you're doing really, really well. And good looks like somewhere between 15 to 20%. The second point here is actually that in addition to that pure customer-facing AI, you've also got a lot of benefits from having AI be an agent assist tool or a co-pilot to help your agents, and that in turn can help answer customer queries. But if we contrast the 20% paradigm today, and if we go to the next slide, what we see in terms of containment rate for chatbots with a generative model is actually you can get over 50% and in some cases over 60%. Klarna were in the news over the last couple of weeks because they've managed to automate over 2/3 of their chats using a generative approach. And certainly from our customers and other case studies we've seen, you can get to 40% very, very quickly with just your initial deployment. And then over time, as you build out and refine your prompts and your knowledge base, you can get over that 50% mark. The reason that you get that higher containment rate is because the generative or the LLM behind the generative AI is fundamentally much better at understanding exactly what the user is after, and then obviously does a good job of providing that answer from the data set. So in terms of the benefits then, this means faster responses for your customers, so they're having to wait, they're not having to wait as long. And you're also seeing from a setup point of view that you can get up and running, not only you can get up and running really quickly with this, but for that long tail of different ways customers might ask questions, you really can minimize that kind of training phrase exercise, data input exercise that you'd have to do in the intent world, because the LLM is so good at understanding the intent. Final thing here is actually just making life a lot easier for your agents, not only because the AI has dealt with the basic answers, but because you can use that same AI to guide, coach, and train your agents in real time. Now, AI is not perfect. Obviously, it's only been in the public perception in the last 18 months since ChatGPT was launched, but it's obviously a field that's been going a lot longer than that. And one of the key issues that we face is hallucinations. So this is where the AI is confidently incorrect. And this stems from the fact that it is fundamentally probabilistic. It is not deterministic. And while the upside of that is you don't have to pre-program it with specific rules, the downside is it can sometimes get things wrong. So how do we overcome that in the contact center? So over the long term, or the longer term, we see that as the models get better and better, the accuracy and reliability of the models is improving, and that in turn is reducing the chance of hallucination. The other thing that we're doing here at Talkative in the short term is being clever with how we're prompting the AI. So we'll send the customer's message across to the model, we'll get a response, and then we get another AI to fact check, if you like, that response against your knowledge base. So this is not 100% guaranteed perfect, but we found it's very, very good at reducing those hallucinations. The second kind of main risk or perceived risk you might have with deploying generative AI is, what happens if it starts saying silly things about my business or something that's just irrelevant to helping the customer. So the way that we get around this is with an approach called RAG, which is Retrieval Augmented Generation. And what it means is you're not using the model's base capabilities, you're sandboxing it down to a predefined, pre-approved knowledge base, which is typically your website. It could be some employee handbooks or whatever it is. But what it means then is you're not going to be able to get the AI to say, what it thinks of the who's going to vote for in the election, what its favorite sports team is, anything like that. You really lock it down. And this is very good at then avoiding those irrelevant responses. There's also a number of other kind of security-focused things we do in order to avoid people being able to jailbreak the AI. So it's keeping it in that sandboxed environment at all times when responding. The final piece here then is probably an obvious one, but it's just making sure that you're able to hand off to a human, it's, at least when you're in hours. As the AI is not perfect, you want to ensure that if a customer does need a human for whatever reason, they can get through to them. So how have we been deploying, or where to begin? So the first thing is, as with any IT type project, you need to look at what are your goals, what are your metrics, your baseline metrics, and how do you improve on them? I think these will differ from business to business, but typically they are self-service rate or contact center efficiency or average wait time. Now from there, what you next need to do is look at what are customers contacting us about and which paths are going to be appropriate for a generative response and which questions actually do we think an intent-based model is going to be better, and maybe which conversations we're always going to need a human for. Maybe they're really complex or really high value or whatever it might be. So to analyze your conversations, obviously you need a combination of informally discussing in the contact center with the agents and supervisors, manually reviewing a couple of transcripts. But what you should definitely be doing is using AI to also analyze your conversations. And it's really, really good at summarizing hundreds or thousands of transcripts to find the common patterns. So once you've done that, the next step then is data. We can stay on the next slide, it's fine. Thanks. The data, the responses that you get are only as good as the data you give it. Because we're going for this sandbox or knowledge-based approach, if you have a really good data set, then the answers are going to be really good. And to give a counterexample of that, we going through a deployment with a customer recently. They said, we've got this really long 200-page PDF. It's great. We're going to use that. Then a few weeks later, we find out that the PDF is completely out of date. And actually, we need to use the website and some other documents instead. So making sure that you've got that data there. And in most cases, you will. It's just a case of identifying where that info is. In terms of deployments of the Talkative GenAI chatbot, here is a screenshot. While this is a screenshot from my computer, this is a genuine question that someone asked. And this, I think, gives a really good idea of the type of response that you can get. And this is just taken from a static knowledge base with no pre-written answers. It was just there. The AI has understood exactly what the intent of the question was, and then has given this response. Now, I think it's very much a false dichotomy to think of intense or generative. All the customers that are using this within Talkative are taking a combined approach where you either will have some suggestion chips up front to make sure you're finding out what type of query the customer is going to ask. So if you've got, say, 3 different products or brands, maybe you want to find out what that customer is asking about first. And then you have the generative AI responses. Equally, you could have a generative response first. And then maybe, like in this case, you've got easy ways to speak to the agent, or potentially you want to capture some lead data, and that's probably best done in a more intent-based format. We've seen definitely a wide range of interest in this across different industries. I think one thing that surprised me personally is when I think of chatbots, I think it's going to answer the basic questions. What hours are you open? What's your returns policy? And of course, generative is good at that. But I think it's a bit more surprising that it's good at more complex inquiries. So for example, with one of our retail clients, they're using this to do almost like a product advisory type chatbot where you can ask it for a number of different dimensions of the particular product you're interested in, and it will search through the website and the product catalog to find you the most appropriate product. Something that you think would be beyond a typical chatbot is something that this generative AI does a really great job at. So what have we learned? I think absolutely keeping a human in the loop is highly, highly recommended, both in the sense of handing off from chatbot to agent, but also actually reviewing your initial deployments of the generative model. And what we've got here is a screenshot from the platform where you can see what questions have customers asked that have not resulted in a matched AI response. And as you can see, some of these are perhaps completely irrelevant, they're just time wasters. But what you can then start to do is extract patterns from this, and then you can add to your knowledge base, and that creates a virtuous cycle where you're improving the AI's ability to respond over time. And what you will then see is your containment rate, which, we'd say to begin with is maybe 40 to 45% on a day one deployment. That should start to go up over time as you start adding to your knowledge base and the AI can do a better job. There's also a number of kind of tweaks you might want to do both to your prompt, and that's something you can do in Talkative. So you might want to say, here are my brand guidelines, or, please make sure to address the customer by their name at all times, things like that. And you might also want to change some of the data that, while it makes sense on a web page on your website, might not make sense in a chat. So a good example of this is most websites will have a contact us page where you can ring an 800 number, but that doesn't make as much sense in a generative response. So for example, if the generative response says, if you want to learn more, please contact so-and-so, what you want it to say there is, please press speak to an agent or transfer over live chat. Whereas the website might have said, call 0800, whatever. So those are some of the things that come up in your testing that are easy to remedy. But you often do need that testing phase. So I think that's pretty much it from me. I think the next slide is just talking about this notion of continuous improvement. We definitely say this is something where you want to start small, iterate, maybe try on just a couple of pages first, and then expand over time. But now over to Steve, who's going to show a really great demo.
Thanks, Felix. Okay, let me get it set up here. Okay, so thanks all for making time again to join us today. So what we've made available to everybody and what we'll be showing you primarily throughout the demo today is we've created our own generative AI chatbot here that will be available to you guys to review, something you can share with colleagues, share with customers, or test out yourself just to see what the capabilities are of this platform are. So this widget will be available at the end. We'll share the link with you guys. There's also an ability here just so you can see if you want to send us any messages, any queries, questions that don't come up during the Q&A session today, feel free to use that inquiry. And there's also a link here to our interactive product tour, which is quite a useful guided tour that's available on our website to take you through the wider capabilities of the Talkative platform, but also covering some of the pieces that we've got today. So the most important thing really for you guys is to get in and start seeing how generative AI works and how it looks. So in order to produce something that was a little bit less focused on a specific industry or a specific business, we've been able to take a series of popular magical books, load that into a generative AI chatbot, and we're going to utilize that to simulate the experience of a young lad getting his application to university, and using this tool to ask some questions and work his way through, figure out what he needs and where he's going to be part of this university. So there's a couple of other flows here on some suggestion chips that we're going to come back to a little bit later, just to show you some of the other capabilities of the Talkative chatbot tool in general that's outside of generative AI. But immediately here, let's kick off with a question that's part of our knowledge base. So what we've done is take the first 4 books in this series, given that into a knowledge base, and that's the only data. It's completely unsanitized. It's just taking those entire 4 books, it's utilizing those, combining it into the Talkative generative AI tools to produce answers. So you can see here, a typical question has been able to be responded to using a vast amount of data in there. And hopefully, if you read through that really quickly, you can see how generative AI isn't just giving you the bullet points, as it were, straight out of the knowledge base that it has. It's structured a reply in natural language. It's simulating a certain persona and responding back in a certain way. It's got tops and tails into that to make it a little bit more conversational, and provide what I think is an extremely good response. Now, obviously, the thing to recognize here is that if we were doing this in Dialogflow, there are millions, potentially billions of questions that a customer might ask of those first 4 books in this series. And being able to create a conversational flow there in Dialogflow would have been a massive task, a huge amount of effort, both to maintain and update, but to produce that data initially in the first place, right? So what we've got here, as you can see, is a very, very simple way, a very quick and easy way to set these up, and we'll go through in a minute how we've created a knowledge base, how we reference it in a chatbot, and how we utilize these tools. The other thing, as Felix was describing earlier, is that we do guardrail the solution for you, right? So we will only use data that's in the knowledge base. If I ask a question that isn't in there, the platform is able to handle that. It understands that there's no specific knowledge here. It's not going to hallucinate and generate a random answer out of thin air, or try and take any of its data and massage that into an appropriate answer here. We've had a failure. We configure our chatbot to be able to deal with that failure, give the customer some info, give them an ability to re-ask that question or go back in and provide an alternative response. So in this case, obviously doesn't know anything about the previous question, but should know about this one. We'll flow back through. We're going to ask another question and we get another response. Again, nicely structured, using the data set that it has available to it, and able to provide like a very human sounding answer to this question, and maintain a level of excitement for the person that it's talking to on their experience here, with these responses. So that's a quick idea of how we utilize knowledge bases right there within the chatbot itself. Harry here has decided now that he actually wants to talk to somebody about various things. So we've transferred this conversation across here out of the chatbot into a live queue. So I'm going to answer that conversation. And for anybody that hasn't seen, the Talkative interface, and this is, the same interface that we'll utilize in any of the platforms that you might see Talkative integrated into, we have a whole load of knowledge and data available to us instantly there. Anything we might have collected from that customer, any data we may have got, we've got history of conversations, the full transcript here, obviously, of everything that was said in that conversation. Now, what we can also do, though, is take advantage of that generative AI knowledge base to support and supplement the ongoing agent's conversation through what's called Agent Assist. There'll be some developments here that we might cover towards the end of this session around providing co-pilots and other tools available. But this customer here has asked a specific question, like what subjects am I going to be able to take at Hogwarts? Now, because this is now not part of the chatbot conversation, we can still apply that same generative AI answers here. And what we do is present that to the agent as a suggestion, something they can use. Now, we do have the option to both send the message as is or fill in the chat box. So in my example here, I'm just going to fill the chat box in and quickly review this message to see exactly what's going to be said. Now, the data set that we've got here does include, characters and information that might be part of that response. So in this example, it's done a good job of making sure that's not there, but it may be we look at this knowledge base answer, we might want to make some decisions in advance as to, what data we do want to share, what data we don't want to share in this instance. In this case, we are happy. So I'm just going to click send and immediately respond to that. So the agent itself doesn't have to structure a response and a reply, doesn't have to spend a few minutes collecting some data or typing a specific response. The generative AI is able to provide them a human sounding answer that, if required, can be edited, can be changed, but hopefully achieves most of the work that an agent might go through to be able to respond to this info. And again, we've got another follow-up question here, and I'm just going to quickly check that and make sure we're not, it's not created a wider response there that mentions any of the characters or any other info. And in the real world, obviously providing the response that is accurate. I'd be remiss of that as an agent if I wasn't checking this info. But all looks good. I'm happy with that. We're going to send that response back straight out to the user. So thanks, goodbye. Let's sort of end the whole flow here. The system even down to the point of actually sort of generating, goodbye things. And as you can see, wishing you a magical journey and a wonderful time at Hogwarts. The generative AI is very good at sort of, simulating the idea of a human engaging in a conversation here. So Harry's all happy. He's going to end his conversation down. You'll be able to run through that flow yourselves, ask your own questions, see how the system responds, see how it behaves while you work your way through. I thought that all went well, so I'm going to give myself a nice thumbs up there. And meanwhile, we're going to end that conversation. This was quite obviously a muggle that we were talking to, so I'm going to end that all up. So let's jump back into the chatbot again, just to show you some of the other elements that are outside of generative AI here before we show you how we create the generative AI database, the knowledge bases, and all the elements that we might need. So there is obviously the ability to support traditional intent-based and decision tree-based solutions. So by selecting some options here, I could be given some guided info, some messages, or some intents to flow down and figure out where I am. In this case, just really quickly here, we can use, external data sources and information to help supplement that chatbot conversation. In this example, we've gone out to a weather endpoint on the internet to give us some info where Hogwarts is located. And in case you're not aware, the chatbot can collect data, like we've asked Harry for his name and stored that. We can display images, we can share links, share additional info with that user as we need to. So all of that's configurable within the Talkative chatbot. So how would we configure these tools and use those? So when you use our chatbot again in future, so you can reference the whole process that we're going to go through here, there's a button there called Generative AI Information. If you use that, it's going to just take you on a step-by-step journey through the whole process of creating knowledge bases, creating a chatbot, and assigning it to Agent Assist if you wish to use those. So very simple terms. We just click next each time. We get a little description, an image, and a link to our relevant knowledge base article on our website here. And that's going to take us through each of those steps that we're about to cover: creating the generative AI knowledge base, creating the chatbot, and creating an agent assist repository that we want to use within that specific agent. So it's all nice, plain, easy English, very simple to show people exactly what's involved in setting up these technologies. Okay, so let's shut down this conversation and we'll go to the first step here, which is actually how we create Talkative knowledge bases. So within the administration interface of Talkative, I've got a couple of knowledge bases that are already created here. One I'm going to reference here right now as we work on through. And I've got my Harry Potter books 1 to 4. So both of these knowledge bases exist. You have no limitations in Talkative about how many knowledge bases that you can create. You can assign these to different agent assist queues, assign them at different points in the chatbot. A good example, as Felix was describing earlier, is thinking about how potentially you expose knowledge to the customer within a knowledge base. So you could structure a system, maybe if you've got, a specific brand and you want to focus in on certain products, you could guide the customer with suggestion chips first so that we're only ring fencing knowledge about that one specific product rather than a wider knowledge base of info, because accuracy may not be quite as good if we're looking at a huge knowledge base and thousands of products that we might have as an organization and replying to answers about those. So again, the thing we want to do, or the thing that the generative AI gives us the ability to do, is rapidly and very quickly create these knowledge bases. Again, unlike with Dialogflow, that would require a lot of effort, a lot of pre-thinking, a lot of data collection and caption from the customers to kind of think about what all of those questions are and how a customer is going to ask them. All we've got to do here is create a knowledge base. So Talkative gives you two options. There's a file-based knowledge base that you can create. If you do have the data in a text or a CSV file of some kind, you can load that in and we'll scan that and use that to create our knowledge base. But a typical starting point for a lot of our customers is this knowledge might already exist somewhere, either on their website or in some PDFs and documentation that we may have somewhere. So you have the option to create URL-based knowledge bases. So I'm going to create one here by using some areas of our website to show you how we create that scan. So when we create URL-based, obviously we can just go in and manually list each of the URLs, remove any specific URLs to ensure that we're only containing the data that we want to contain. There might be parts of your website that are completely irrelevant and you don't wish to use at any point. But what we can also do, for simplicity's purposes, is just select a specific domain or a sub URL of a domain and get the system just to scrape and scan all that for us. In this case, you can see I'm using the updates page on the Talkative site, which is all of our blog articles, all of our product updates that go up on the system there. The system's just looking at that URL, recognizing there are 58 pages in there, and I could just very quickly enter that. If I did want to remove any of those, just go and click the thing and take that out. The other advantage then of using URL-based knowledge bases is that it's highly likely that data might be updating on the website. And so you don't have to separately maintain this knowledge base. We can keep going back to the website at regular intervals, or the URLs that we've created here, either daily, weekly, or monthly as appropriate, and refresh that knowledge base automatically. So it's zero ongoing maintenance here when you're using this model. Your system can just keep updating itself. Now, obviously, as part of your continuous improvement, that might not be an ideal way to do it. You might recognize there's data that customers asking that aren't part of the website, in which case we can pivot all this data across into a text file at a click of a button and manage that in a more static knowledge base if required as well. So I'm going to click the create button just to show you this process, because as you can see, it's as simple as that. I've created a knowledge base article called Talkative Updates, and we'll be able to reference this, in fact, that version, just to make sure that it has scanned in a moment when we get to the chatbot. So just really quickly, you can see here, you've always got knowledge about when that knowledge base was updated, when it was changed, when it was refreshed. And when you've created a knowledge base like I've done here, which will take a couple of minutes to process, I will receive an email at that time to let me know that knowledge base has been created and everything's good to go. So the next thing is we need to be able to use this in a chatbot flow if we want to expose this within that world. So for anybody that hasn't seen the Talkative GUI for building a chatbot, as you can see, it's extremely graphical. Again, very different to what we would have seen in Dialogflow ES and even far less complicated than what you might see in Dialogflow CX. So everything within the chatbot flow that we've just been looking at is visible here in this flow on the screen. So if we kind of route through this kind of standard route where we came into the system there and was prompted with a couple of options on our toolbar here, what we're going to do is just add a third option now that will reference that Talkative Updates page and that knowledge base that we've used. So again, no massive effort required here. I'm just going to click the plus button, which now adds a third option into the menu there. And I'm just going to put in a suggestion, as it were, of what we want the suggestion chip to look at. So the system is going to build that for me. It's not going to require me to go and separately add, a load of knowledge or a load of additional info on the screen there in order to do this. So I'm just going to copy my little bit of text. Obviously, anytime we're going to use generative AI, we need to be able to prompt the customer to enter some information. So the way that works with Talkative is, first of all, we're going to send them a little message. It's key here to understand as well that the prompt that you use to ask the question to the customer will actually be used by generative AI to decide how it's going to answer. So there's almost a fine art here in how you ask the question as to how generative AI will actually respond and reply. And we've seen some dramatic differences in the quality of the responses based on the question that actually gets asked there within the chatbot. So in this example, we're asking the customer to type us a question. What I'm going to do here is just tell the system to wait for that user to enter some info before moving on to the next option on the toolbar. So once we've got that question from the customer, the thing we'll need to do is within Talkative here, look up that message in an AI knowledge base. So I'm just going to remove that text. So only thing it's going to do is look up that knowledge. Now, when you use the lookup knowledge in Talkative, again, no specific coding or massive development here. This is something even a normal user should be able to do. You're just going to get a drop down where you can select then from the knowledge bases that are available to you that you've created there within Talkative in your knowledge base. So I'm going to use the Talkative Updates one I made earlier link. Now, as we've discussed, there are a couple of models that you can use with OpenAI, ChatGPT. So we give you the option here to decide which model you wish to use. I'm just going to select this to use for here. Now, what happened with Talkative here is we're going to go off then to that knowledge base, and we will either find an answer, in which case the system will automatically play that response back, and any follow-ups can be configured there and what we want to do. Or if it doesn't find that answer, here's where we then flow out an alternative route. So for example, if I did ask, what is a lightsaber? It's likely it's going to follow that route. I can decide what the options are, how we're going to configure that, and how that is going to work next. So in my example here, what I'm going to do lastly is just create a nice graceful flow back around the system here. So I'm just going to call this updates, updates follow up, just so I can name that block and get back to that block again in a second. If I give it a real name, it will make it easier. So as I flow out of the item found successfully, I'm now just going to redirect to a specific node. I'm going to first of all collect some info from the customer, get them to answer a follow-up question, and then flow this customer back to the lookup itself. So if I just, if I change that exit approach, and I choose redirect to node, and then I'm going to select, somebody's coming through the chatbot already. Thank you very much, whoever's having a little play with the system. And select my updates follow-up. You can see I've created that loop here to route the system back round to the system at the top. So what Talkative Chatbot then lets us to do is very quickly and easily test that out and make sure that flow works, see where the answers go, see how this flows. So again, we still have that first step where we're going to ask a name. What will happen here when we're previewing a chatbot within Talkative is it will jump us immediately to the right block as we progress through. So it helps us understand and visualize where this has gone. And as you can see, I've got my new option here, Talkative Updates. So I'm going to select that option, route my way through, and just ask a question now that does exist within our knowledge base here, just so you guys can see how it will generate that answer. So in this case, looking at our knowledge base, looking at the Talkative updates pages on our website, where we can ask, something that's on that repository, and here you can go. You can see this flowing around, giving me that option to progress through. So as you can see, the space of about 5 minutes, I've created a knowledge base. I've added some options to a chatbot. Extremely rapid process to use these tools. So the last thing then is, how do we give this knowledge to the agent as well while we're having a conversation? So within Talkative, we create these OpenAI response models. So it's very simple, just to click the button there to create those new suggestion models as we need to. The reason we may have multiple suggestion models is, first of all, we might have multiple knowledge bases. And what we can do with Talkative is assign a knowledge base to specific queues if required. We might just have one generalized knowledge base that we want to use across every queue, across every system, but it's highly likely you're going to have sales related queries, service related queries. Those are going to use different knowledge bases in order to maintain accuracy. So when we create, we just literally point the relevant queues to the relevant knowledge base here, and that then becomes available to the agent within that agent assist capability within the platform. So we've gone on a couple of minutes there, but I think it's time for us to bounce across to any Q&A that you guys might have, and give Felix and myself a chance to ask us some questions.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thanks for the question. So from Jason, some of the answers are quite long from the GenAI. I think that's a really good point and a good question. So one of the things we're able to do is you can add a supplementary prompt to your GenAI setup. So it might be that if you wanted to keep them under, 100 characters, you could do so. But yeah, I think that's something that we perhaps don't have a perfect answer for today. We're essentially just getting the response back from the model and giving it to the customer with, saying, you are a customer service agent. If you're unsure, don't respond. But I think they do tend to respond slightly differently, where a human might be comfortable sending a one-word response back, like a yes or a no. The AI is incredibly eager and tries to give you as much info as possible.
I think that's very dependent on the knowledge and the question that's being asked as well, right? So a lot of my answers there, obviously I've got millions of characters in the knowledge base there that we were using. And so the relevant answer is actually quite full of information, right? And the questions I was answering specifically there, if you feel free to play with this, Jason, afterwards, obviously I wasn't sure if that was you coming through there, but somebody was having a play already. And I think, go and ask some questions and see how it responds. I think if you give it quite a contained question, if you're looking for a certain piece of information, I've seen very small responses as well, right? It doesn't always flower them up into big questions. I think it's very dependent on the types of questions and the types of knowledge that you're using. The other thing that maybe didn't come across ideally in that conversation there, and I think you're talking about asking follow-up questions there in your question, is that it is very good at maintaining context, right? So if you do answer a question and it gives you a response, if that response is a little small and you want that expanding upon, if the customer asks you to expand what happened before, in Dialogflow, that'd be an extremely complicated follow-up process, managing context through multiple intents and being able to respond as appropriate. Generative AI takes everything that happened before it, the entire conversation transcript, all of the prompts, everything that we've said, it's able to use that and to provide that more enhanced response. And it's very easy to maintain that context and expand a conversation as we need to in a specific direction without having to worry about how we structure a chatbot to deal with that.
Great. And then Jason, your other question around responding in different languages. So the short answer is yes, it does depend on which model you use. And Chris will come to your question in a second. But if you use, I believe it's GPT-4, it's very adept at responding in and understanding in whatever language you choose. Now, again, it comes back to how you're setting up the prompt, because I believe the default way it works is if you ask it a question in Latin or Welsh or whatever, it will respond in English. It will give a very good response if you did understand English. So you need to either in your Talkative chatbot editor or in the prompts, set it up such that it will respond in the user's native language or the language in which the question was asked. So no problems. So Chris, your question around GPT 3.5 versus 4. As we saw from Patsy's graph, 4 is a lot more capable. It's a lot more intelligent, for lack of a better word, but it has a much better general understanding of language and the meaning behind language. It does have its downside, so it is more expensive to use, and it has a higher latency. So you'll notice with each of these questions, you've got a 2 to 3 second delay. If you use GPT-4, it's, I think, nearer 5 to 6 seconds. So again, it comes back down to what is your knowledge base, what are your answers. For most general customer service inquiries, 3.5 does a great job. But if you've got perhaps more complex financial data, or you've got more perhaps numeric data, GPT-4 might be better. Or yeah, maybe if you're trying to deal in lots of different languages in a really effective way. Now, there are plans to introduce other models. Obviously, OpenAI is not the only provider in town. Certainly, we see a future where you're going to have almost a model app store, a model ecosystem where maybe you want to bring your own model, your self-hosted model that's fine-tuned on your data. We're speaking to a very large global financial services company just last week, and that's something they're talking to us about because they've fine-tuned their own model. But I think most of our clients and most contact centers will use an off-the-shelf model, but the customization of that model is done based on your data set rather than fine-tuning the model. So if there are no more questions, got a couple of kind of future things to show. So if I share my screen, what we've got here is a couple of additional AI assistance tools or co-pilot tools that are coming out in the next couple of weeks. So as you saw before, when in our chat console here, if we've got a question from the customer, we've got this knowledge-based response up here. But there are a couple of new things. So the first is Godfrey. We may change the name, but it's stuck so far. So think of Godfrey as your AI colleague who you can ask questions of. So whereas these messages up here are automatically created, what you can't do at the moment as an agent is ask a question of that content, or maybe you want to check what your policy is, or whatever it may be. So in this case, I'm going to say, do we also support Facebook? And this is just going to be between me and the AI. We're not showing the customer at all. It's purely internal. Godfrey also has access to all of the transcripts so far, and you can get it to summarize the conversation or recommend a next action for the customer. And I think particularly if you've got a much longer conversation, and maybe you've had this transferred from a colleague, or it's referencing something, maybe you're a new agent to the team. We think this is going to be really helpful to advisors. The other piece that's new is the Copilot tool. So if we start typing a message, it's going to autofill based on our knowledge base. But this is also taking into account the broader capabilities of the GPT model. So, for example, if the customer had maybe asked, what's the capital of France, they would do that. That would not give an AI suggestion, because that's just based on our knowledge base and is very sandboxed. But when it comes to that assistive technology for the user, for the agent, the autocomplete, then that will take that knowledge into account, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I did say this is still in development, so I've still got a few bugs to iron out first. I think that was it. So everyone will give you 5 minutes back in your day. If you have any more questions, please let us know. Tomorrow we'll be emailing out a recording of the webinar. And if you're an existing Talkative customer, please get in touch and we can help you set this up on your account, even if it's just a demo, and have a play around with, like with Steve's Harry Potter bot that he shared. Right, thanks everyone. Bye now.